Morning all, God here. It's come to my attention that this species is in need of some divine assistance, so I've taken the liberty of taking some liberties, as it were. Now you can deal with the conditions that both produce bomb-grade Puritanism and constant exposure of Puritans to things that trigger their desire to sterilize the world from orbit. You are going to exist on the knife's edge of Puritan catastrophe. You thought biting that original apple was bad. Try this new apple. Apple. Oh my. Oh, I kill myself sometimes. Oh, I don't go to watch me some Space Ghost.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the For Real stream of Puritan Shameful Secret, where we will have a discussion with the deer that is Teal. And I'm joined by Allison and Teal Deer. This time for real.
Yeah. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everybody. In this case, I don't think that we did anything wrong.
No, we did nothing wrong.
We did nothing wrong. This time
we didn't do nothing. Didn't do nothing.
It was all Google Plus and YouTube's. For real.
For real.
You can believe us. You can believe us because we're trustworthy. Okay, so this particular episode, we're going to be talking about two videos, both of which are on the Honey Badger Radio channel. So if you're from Teal Deer's channel, you can view them so you'll understand the context. The names of those two videos are The Shameful Secret, How Puritanism's Shameful Secret Will Destroy Them, and How Social Justice Warriors Are Smarter Than You. And I made a mistake on the first one. It's How Social Justice Warriors' Shameful Secret Will Destroy Them, and How Social Justice Warriors Are Smarter Than You. So if you're interested in the context of this discussion, go take a look at those videos. And to give you a little bit of an overview, essentially they're a discussion of how we conform our memories to the greater social narrative. There is some science that indicates that as people, we tend to conform our memories themselves to social consensus. So the group narrative becomes how we see or remember the world. And up to this point, as far as I know, and Teal Deer might correctly, we don't really have a causal mechanism for how we do this. And so in my videos, I propose that the causal mechanism is disgust. And I title it Disgust-Based Thinking, which is something that I sort of came to and I had an idea about in a discussion with Jordan Peterson a couple weeks ago, in which he explained that social justice warriors, and also Hitler, interestingly enough, are very much disgust-based thinkers. They think they have a lot of disgust. They are high on disgust and desire for purity, and so is Hitler. And so when we were talking about that, I sort of thought, maybe this explains some of how we make our thoughts conform to social consensus, and our memories conform to the group narrative. And so I have this proposal that we basically use disgust to conform, to change the way we think about things. So we'll use disgust to repel us away from certain concepts and towards others. And I also further propose that there may be two, more like a spectrum, but they're on one extreme end of the spectrum are extreme disgust-based thinkers who pretty much can't deviate from this idea of sorting things and making connections based on whether or not the thing in question is disgusting or pure. And then there's all the way on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who don't actually sort their experiences, their thoughts, in new information, new data points, new whatever, based on disgust. And their brains would be a large interconnection of connections between ideas. And I called them bush-brained versus disgust-brained. And I don't know if that helps. Teal Deer and Brian, I don't know if my explanation has helped at all, but there it is. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where do we begin with this idea? Discussing it.
Okay. First of all, I'm going to start this off. I think disgust does play a role in it. The idea of disgust being sort of the center point of like how we would condition a society to all sort of believe in one way of thinking or moving towards it, that I think is a little bit of a stretch. Simply because social consensus is kind of a mixture of different ideas. Now, some of those ideas can be informed by disgust, in some cases on quite a basal level. But other ones, I would think not. Other ones we've definitely got examples of people sort of overcoming things like that to then reach social consensus that then is definitely not disgust based, but serves a sort of greater purpose then.
Okay, so just to get back into that, so what are the other mechanisms that you would identify as specifically my proposal was that we make our memories conform with the greater social narrative by using disgust as a method of repelling us from things that were considered to be taboo or not acceptable. So what are the other ways that
Well,
we
in
do
that instance, you're not conforming your knowledge to something. You're taking on someone else's position. In that, you're not actually making the decision yourself. Like, to go to the example which you used in the video, I can't remember the name of the experiment, but it was the monkey with the banana experiment.
Yeah, no, actually, just to correct that, because some people got on my case, even though I indicated very clearly that it was apocryphal. That story never really happened. It's just a way of illustrating
Yeah.
a commonly observable phenomenon. Another example from real life would be kosher or halal food. And Muslims and Jewish people maintain the same kind of food taboos, even though technically we live in a society with refrigeration, so they're not really as necessary to maintain health. But they still remain disgusting because of the social consensus from way back in the past about, not eating meats that won't store well.
And this is actually something that's quite interesting, because this then comes where you realize how much society has been informed from the basal point of biology here. Disgust is sort of really quite an interesting reaction in people, actually. It comes about sort of as a means of avoiding diseases and pathogens. So in the regards to food things, kosher, halal, whatnot like that, that was as a means of avoiding basically getting sick and eating things that would be bad for you. It just sort of came up with a reason as to why. Because when you're in a situation where you don't understand what microbes are, you don't understand what bacteria is, you just have to come up with something else. In other interesting things about food and culture and whatnot is you notice in hotter areas, which are more likely to have pathogen spread, you'll notice people use more spices in cooking and in storing food, because again, that actually lowers the level of pathogen in your food. So this is sort of where this biology then meets culture in that regard. So as we move on, we develop things like cooking abilities, we develop storage abilities. So these sorts of things then become unnecessary. They came from the basal biological necessity, but then they've just sort of moved into something that is purely cultural from there. Now, at that point, then you're not, as I said, you're not then making your own decision about that. You're just taking information from someone else and just sort of saying, well, I'm just doing this because, well, someone told me to, basically.
Yeah, that's where my proposal came in. What disgust is the function there is to actually, because when we encounter things that are contradictory with our knowledge of ourselves, we want to see ourselves as being free and autonomous. We'll often tell ourselves stories as to why we're doing something that maintains our sense of ourselves as being free and autonomous while actually complying with authority. And that's where I was saying that the disgust comes in. The mechanism is, the authority says you can't think that, you can't touch that, you can't do that. And instead of just, dealing with and if it's inconsistent with your own self-concept as being free, then you invent a story as to why you're not doing it. And my proposal is that disgust plays a large role in that story. So we instead of constantly maintaining this idea of subservience and lack of autonomy to authority, we invent a reason why we personally chose not to do that thing. And
So in essence, you sort of you try to basically give yourself autonomy in something that wasn't ultimately sort of your personal choice. You post hoc rationalize it.
You post hoc rationalize why you are complying with authority. In specific, often it's a situation where you have a desire and the authority does not approve of that particular desire. So what you do instead is you sort of problematize that desire. You say, well, whatever I was desiring, I don't really desire it because it's actually disgusting. It's the example I used was the monkeys with the banana being taught that they weren't allowed to touch the banana. And the apocryphal story, and yes, it's not an accurate example of a scientific experiment. It's basically just a story to illustrate the process of doing this, of transferring knowledge from generation to generation without knowing exactly why you're doing that. But the story goes like this, just simple reduction. You have a bunch of monkeys in a cage, and there's a banana on a ladder, and the whenever a monkey touches the banana, you punish all of them. And you do this enough till whenever a monkey even looks at the banana or approaches the banana, the rest of the monkeys basically kick the shit out of him to stop the group punishment. And then you gradually replace all of those monkeys. And so you put in a new monkey, and that monkey learns the rules. Every time I go near the banana, I get beat. And then you just keep doing it until all of the original monkeys that were punished whenever one of them touched a banana are gone, punished by the experimenters. And all the ones that are remaining are the ones who learned the rule that you don't touch the banana in this cage, but they don't know why. So they can't really explain it to themselves anymore. And my proposal was one of the ways that if you're a self-conscious monkey, having learned that you can't touch the banana, but you still desire it because monkeys desire bananas, one of the ways that you reconcile this is maybe to tell yourself a sort of a sour grapes thing. Well, it's not because all the other monkeys are going to shove me out of monkey society for desiring the banana. It's because bananas are disgusting. That banana is probably moldy, or he's poisoned, or there's some aspect of it that makes it less desirable. So you essentially to resolve this dissonance between, not wanting to constantly feel like you're being subjugated, you rationalize to yourself that you don't want it anymore. And I was saying that to bring it to the human population, I'm proposing that there are groups of people out there who shall remain currently unnameless, who are able to do this process really easily. So in other words, they go very quickly from an authority telling them that something is desirable to inventing a story for themselves of how that desirable thing is actually disgusting, to resolve the dissonance. We're always looking for shortcuts to maintain our image of ourselves and to reduce our mental effort in doing so. Does that make sense, or am I stretching too much?
Yeah, no, it's okay. So from what I'm getting from this, it's just there was a set of rules for whatever reason. Over time, you forget why that rule is there, and then because you've forgotten it, you just begin to start coming up with some sort of explanation for it. And then as part of that explanation, some people will eventually just basically paint the thing that has been forbidden as being unclean, because generally reasons why people avoid things is because there is a perception that that thing is in some way pathogenic, or it's generally harmful for you to be near or to associate with.
Yeah, and there's another reason too that I didn't go into too much, but when there's a social consensus that you need to avoid something, like a particular thought, or a particular concept or a particular thing, but there is curiosity, that desire. Curiosity is a form of desire. It's a desire to know, or there maybe even just be plain desire for the thing. You avoid it because you know that it will make your social body sick. That's why I use like the idea of this self-conscious monkey that's aware that it has sort of a social body, like a connection with the group. And you don't want to make that sick.
Well,
Because,
that is just a carryover of a phenomenon called the law of contagion.
could you explain that?
Yes, the law of contagion is really simple. It's basically just contact with anything that is disgusting makes you disgusting.
Yeah, okay.
That's all it is. It's a very well-known phenomenon in humans and actually quite a lot of other animals as well. It's just that touching something that would generally be pathogenic or in some cases morally disgusting, because the two are actually very, very closely linked in the human brain. They actually activate the same parts of the brain if you MRI people who are feeling disgust. And so because of that, people will then just stay away from it because they don't want to become contaminated. But this is then where the social compliance comes in, because you might not think that the thing that you're doing is disgusting, but you know that other people will think that it is. So if they found out that you were doing it, then that would then lower your social standing in their eyes. So in that instance, that's not then your disgust reaction to it. That's then your sense of social shame and social ostracism.
Yeah, but the sense of humility, the sense of shame and social ostracism is based on, I think, on the physical sensation of disgust. I mean, it's a more abstracted version of it, but I think it's ultimately based on it. Like if you in haptics, because I did a lot of research into haptics. Haptics is sort of the science of touch. We scaffold a lot of our more, I don't know, elaborate emotions, more advanced emotions on more basic tactile sensations. So feelings of social shame and humiliation are scaffolded on feelings of nausea and disgust. But they're combined with other memories, other sensations as well. So I would say that idea that the moral disgust is also similar to the physical disgust, or at least it's a
It
reflection
is.
of it.
It's actually identical, completely. I've actually got a bit of a write up about this because I did sort of a bit of extra research and pulled in some interesting studies for this. Yeah, disgust, physical disgust and moral disgust, they are, for all intents and purposes, biologically completely identical to each other. As I've said, they cause the same areas of your brain, specifically the insular cortex, to actually sort of start firing up if you were to scan someone who is experiencing either physical disgust or moral disgust. Let's see if I can find the area very quickly for it.
Well, while you're
So,
finding that, going further, the proposal here is that there are certain individuals or certain large, well, you know, at least a large minority of people who really are drawn to this way of thinking, into dividing the world into pure and impure, and basically trying to destroy the impure to save the pure. And I think, well, maybe we can start naming names. Social justice warriors, apparently, according to Jordan Peterson, they're very high on disgust, probably very high on disgust-based thinking. And I would
yeah.
say that historically, there are other groups of people who were very high on disgust-based thinking. Segregationists who needed to keep that distant, you know, the separation between the races. Of course, there might also be logical reasons for that, but and then because it actually in the video I showed footage from segregationist protests versus social justice warrior protests of men's issues, like just discussing men's issues, and the level of like repetition in the facial expressions between these two protests was incredible. I've done this before in the past, looked at segregationists versus the people who protest men's issues stuff, and it's usually men's issues or freedom of speech stuff that they're protesting. And I noticed this kind of this repetition of facial expression, but I found a new one this time, because there is actually two new ones. There is a woman, the segregationist woman, who has such an incredible shit-eating grin. Like she's just really enjoying herself at the segregationist protest. And then right after that, and I do it in the video, there's a feminist, a Marxist feminist, with exactly the same expression on her face as she's spitting and menacing people who are going to a lecture by Warren Farrell, who just wants to talk about, suicide and men's issues with education. And she's got this enormous, just gleeful grin on her face as she's just like, and I'm just astounded. I'm actually perplexed what the emotional framework is behind that expression, because she's really happy to be part of this protest, and that other woman during the segregationist protest was really happy to be part of the protest. This was like Sunday outing for them. But and the other thing that I noticed is smugly puffs. That smug expression of just self-satisfaction. Another expression that you can see in segregationist protests constantly is this smugness. And I'm looking at all this and I'm wondering, there's just some connection here, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you have any insight to that, Teal Deer, or if you found what you're looking for and we can talk about it now.
Oh, I have many things, so many. Okay. Right. Okay, I'm gonna do just a little read off of something which I've got here, and then I'll address what you said about the smug looks. If I sound like I'm deviating from it, tell me to talk about smug people, and I'll get back onto it.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
So a little bit which I've got is about the puritanical folk and the very, very sanctimonious, feminist social justice types. There's a reason here why they refuse to deal with people who they disagree with so frequently. It's why they want to, why they sort of refuse to acknowledge, in some cases, a lot of MRAs. They won't even listen to their talking points or anything like that. It's because they feel sort of disgust for their existence. They fear that if they talk to them, they're going to become contaminated. God forbid you take on and agree with one of their viewpoints, because then that ruins you as a person. That very much is the interaction of disgust. I've actually got a very interesting little anecdote here from a recent video which I saw. The feminist content creator Michael Rowlands?
No, not offhand, but I don't know any names of anything.
Okay. He was one of the people in the 26 passive-aggressive gotcha videos.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right.
The guy who looked like he was doing it from the back of a gay sauna. That guy.
I know the sauna.
Okay.
There you go.
The sauna. Okay.
That is a whole other story for a whole other video, I feel. But yeah, he recently did a video on his channel where he was talking about how he believes that like biological sex is a spectrum, something which is patently false. If you know anything about cell division, non-disjunction of gamete cells, and how all of this works, that biological sex is absolutely supposed to fall into a binary, but there are errors along the way as cells split. And in this video, he just constantly was banging on, I'm so empathic that I understand that there are people who don't fall into this one or the other. I'm so empathic. It was all this virtue signaling about how empathetic he was for this. But then, when it came to people who say, well, no, there are only two biological sexes, the first thing that he said was bigot. So I can't believe that there are people so bigoted that they would have that point of view. And then that totally subverts his own previous assertion of empathy. A truly empathic person would understand why someone would come to that conclusion. I mean, you could still disagree with them, maybe explain why you think you're wrong, but to instantly label them as a bigot for thinking differently from you underlies the true position. And the true position is you're not empathic, you're disgusted by the idea that someone would disagree with you. It's the complete opposite of empathy. And what's interesting about that is then that it's a selected form of empathy which is governed by the disgust that you have for your outgroup. And hey, I remembered to get back onto the smug people. That is an in-group outgroup dynamic. And it's tied to the sense of morality. As we've said, disgust can be both physical and moral. And we know this because of brain scans. I do have a section somewhere on that, which I can dig up and read. But that is an in-group, out-group dynamic thing that you're seeing. So when someone is disgusted with the out-group, they are necessarily setting themselves up because, I'm me, I'm on the in group, I'm the good one, I'm the one doing it right. So anything that chastises an out group, anything that reminds you that you are morally superior to them, and again, that does sort of tie into disgust at that point. They're beneath you, they are disgusting. So you reminding yourself of that, that's going to give you an ego boost. That's going to give you the rise. That's like, oh, I'm so much fucking better than you. And that is then where that sense of smugness comes from. It's reminding yourself that you're better. It's basically just egotistical masturbation, because you've reminded yourself that you are higher up on the moral hierarchy than the filthy peasants who think different from you.
Yeah, that's and I mean, to address something that I saw in chat, someone said that, it was an interesting statement. I'll go back to it, that we also virtue signal, like the Xanadu. Shouldn't we be vigilant to assure that we don't just start doing the same in reply? The knee-jerk social justice warrior disgust is obvious in many. Will it not lead us to be Puritans as well? No, I just wanted to address that. I know personally, I feel a lot of anger towards social justice warriors and feminists. But there is a distinction to be made between anger and contempt, or contemptuous anger, because anger, and there's someone who does research into these kinds of emotions and when you should be seriously concerned in a relationship. Anger is fine. When somebody is angry with you, they're still acknowledging that you are an equal. You don't get angry at your inferiors. You get angry at equals. And you get angry at equals when they fail to uphold some standard of like civil discourse or what you consider to be, social, civic, ethic responsibility. Anger is fine. Don't ever think that it's bad. When things become toxic is when you express contempt. And that is a sense of superiority over the people that you are criticizing. And that's contemptuous anger. And it's characterized by sort of an asymmetrical expression, and that kind of smug look that we were talking about, that Teal Deer was describing. I mean, me and Karen went through dozens and dozens of feminist videos, and after a while, we started to notice that we would constantly be freeze framing on these sort of really snide, snarly looking expressions, not of anger, but of contempt. They were asymmetrical grins. They were smug and creepy, and it just occurred to me that this seems to be so consistent in effect. And it's not the anger that's the problem; it's the contempt. It's that idea that the person that you're talking to is less than human. I don't regard social justice warriors to be less than human. I regard them to be only too human. And I recognize that everybody is potentially going to fall prey to this disgust-based thinking, to this idea that ideas or concepts are beneath them or disgusting, or people who express ideas and thoughts that are different than their own are disgusting or reprehensible. I catch myself doing it as well. I have to be vigilant to make sure that I don't do that I don't engage in that kind of behavior, because it's beneath us. And oh my goodness, just did it then. It's the behavior itself in some circumstances makes sense. When you're dealing with a society that the conditions that your grandfather faced are going to be identical to the conditions that you face, most likely this kind of learning is pretty reasonable. But now we're dealing with like an exponential explosion in technology. We really can't afford to be lagging behind this far with how we approach each other and our technology itself, with these kinds of thinking, this kind of thinking that is inflexible. It is dangerous. It's potentially violent, because, as I put forward in my video, name an atrocity that didn't start with this kind of weaponized Puritanism. Either we have to save the pure from the impure, which you can see in almost any genocide, or we have to wreak our revenge for the ruined damsel. And you can insert anything for the damsel. You can insert an ideology. You can insert a country. You can insert a religion. We have to avenge the fact that our religion, our ideology, our women, whatever, were made impure by the action of this outgroup. I mean, this kind of Puritan rage is behind every kind of atrocity. And it really doesn't have I would argue it doesn't really have a functional basis anymore in our society. Because before, it would keep us from eating the red berries without having, each generation, a couple people dying to teach us not to eat the fucking red berries. But now we don't, like, our circumstances change so rapidly that having these kind of strict social attitudes towards things doesn't serve us anymore. And furthermore, it's what we've inherited emotionally from the past. These ways of thinking that we don't question, that we've inherited emotionally from the past, I would say, in conjunction with the multiplying power of social media, will lead to some seriously negative outcomes for us as a species, unless we directly focus, or we look at this stuff and say, hey, how do we move past it? If there's some wisdom in Puritan thinking, how do we retain that but move past the negative? And I'm going to throw this out to Teal Deer or Brian if you want to add anything to that, because I'm a little bit.
Okay, right. Okay, yeah. So I'm just trying and collect this into a way of saying it all, so it will stream out nicely. Is there sort of a way of holding on to the good parts of Disgust while getting rid of the bad parts? I would say no. It's an evolved behavior. It's universal in all humans. Interestingly, that you mentioned facial expressions earlier. The facial expression of disgust, again, it's one of those universal things. We know there is a biological basis for it, so you're not going to be getting rid of it anytime soon. The problem is that the good parts of disgust, the things which stop you from doing things which are generally harmful to you, eating contaminated foods, playing with your own shit and things like that, that is sort of the good side of it, but the bad side of it is still that. It's just one behavior. The problem is that it just basically becomes maladapted in other environments where it's not necessary. So in that instance, I can't help but think chat's going to light up with all the people talking about coprophilia now. Yeah, you're wrong because I found an exception. No, that's not how it works, because propensities. But anyway.
Well, but the thing is that the absolute disgust towards our fecal matter will create people who desire it, just because of human psychology. We're sort of fucked up. We're fucked up creatures in the whole.
Well, it's just that all human behaviors are only propensities like that. You can get people for whom their sense of disgust is simply non-existent, or just doesn't exist for certain things. That's just how it is, because of how genes are passed on and propagated. You get lots of junk genes that don't do anything, and then you get ones which simply don't activate, and so on and so forth. So you get lots of weird and deviant behaviors like that, which leak down in very small minorities, because that's how reproduction works. It's an imperfect process like that. Yeah. So the idea that you could get rid of the bad parts of it but keeping the good parts, I really don't sort of see happening, because it is just a faculty of human behavior that, as a result, you're probably just never gonna get rid of that. But one thing which I do want to dial back to was when you were talking about facial expressions, because there's a lot of interesting things going on in people's faces when they feel disgust. As I said, first of all, the expression is universal. But what's interesting is that there is actually an event called facial feedback in the display of disgust. And what that is that if you make an expression of disgust when you feel it, it actually increases the acuteness of the feeling. Which is why it's quite interesting that, you get those old school adages of school your face, learn to not show that you're being bothered by something and eventually it doesn't. It's true, because there is actually a mechanism that you can find in people whereby if they express how much something's annoying them, it actually annoys them more. So that's sort of something that's quite interesting there. But another thing very interesting about disgust is that it's actually it's subject to neuron mirroring. So other people showing disgust at something can trigger your own sense of disgust. And this is why I think you might see this spreading so much amongst the social justice people, and why they're able to sort of rile each other up and really end up hating certain groups and certain targets, which rationally you might disagree with them, but there's no reason for you to hate them. But because that sense of disgust can be triggered in other people, this is where you sort of see this happening. And it's actually quite interesting. There have been studies done actually on children, focusing on child development. When you take a child and put it in a room with its parent, and you give the parent two toys to play with, if the parent makes a look of disgust at one toy, but then like smiles at another one, and then you leave the child with both of them, the child will prefer the one that the parent was smiling at, as opposed to the one that it was disgusted by, which ties into what you were saying earlier about how you can learn this. You don't actually even have to have a negative social ramification for this. This is a behavioral pattern that you can reinforce in children simply by facial expression. So just by you showing a face of disgust at something, you can make people feel disgust for that thing, even if they don't know what it is. Or it could be something that they even enjoy, but it can still get that feeling going in people. And it's just very interesting that it's tied very closely, actually, between parents and children as well.
That's actually really interesting, because I think it actually strengthens what I'm talking about. The idea that disgust itself is a learning mechanism.
It is, absolutely. It is a way of teaching people, you don't deal with this because it's bad. But then this is the problem, which again you've highlighted, not to take us round in circles, but that's the inevitable part of it. Eventually, something has been deemed disgusting for so long, you forget why. And then that's when the problems start happening.
Well, yeah, because there's going to inevitably be people like me. I don't know if I was quite as good at doing the whole, oh, it's disgusting, don't touch it thing. I have pictures of me eating, well, I guess all kids eat dirt, but I was like, but anyway, it's, I think
that's because there's a lot of things like that which aren't inherently disgusting. Things like that then are socially conditioned in you for you to find them disgusting, even though they're not really.
Here's the question, because again, Jordan Peterson talked about how, actually, it might have also been Jonathan Haidt. Yeah, I think it was Jonathan Haidt, if I said that correctly. He talked about how libertarians are low on disgust. So they don't seem to engage into the same level of disgust avoidance as other people, whereas social just liberals, libertarians and liberals apparently are very similar in terms of personality. However, they're very different when it comes to disgust. So liberals tend to be very high disgust-based thinkers, and libertarians tend to be very low disgust-based thinking. So I wonder if that, because I just wonder if that has anything to do with that idea that children learn based on disgust. Maybe in many cases, liberals, or more like social justice warriors, because the classical liberals, I guess, would be more like the libertarians, but social justice warriors, maybe they are just continuing into adulthood this need to learn and understand things based on disgust. So, and this is the other thing that I proposed in my video, that disgust-based thinkers, when they get to social media, they're using disgust to try to pre-filter the whole, like all the noise on the internet. So they need to know what is disgusting and what is pure. Otherwise, they feel completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data on the internet and the sheer volume of social interaction possible on the internet. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or
okay, would it interest you to know that disgust is so acutely wired in people's brains in such different ways that with a single shot test, that is, administering a test with one question, you can predict with 95% accuracy where someone falls on the political spectrum.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Um,
What's
Basically, because the insular cortex is a big part of your brain. It's proportionally quite small, but big enough to have its own separate regions. Obviously, they're interior, the posterior, superior, so on and so forth. Pretty obviously, as you would expect it to be labeled. And the pattern that lights up when you show people of right wing, left wing, authoritarian, libertarian, when you show them any particular stimulus. Now, you can usually you'll do this in the form of an image. Different areas of the cortex will light up. And as I said, it's so accurate and so stark, the patterns that this firing takes, that you can predict within a 95% accuracy of whether they're going to be left wing, right wing, libertarian, authoritarian, or something like that. And this is actually really interesting to me as well, because we know from taking MRI scans of people that actually quite a large part of your political alignment is basically determined by your brain structure. And this, I think, is then part of it as well.
Can we
So,
can we get a little bit more into this particular experiment? What was, did you know the image and
not offhand, no. I
I could,
probably dig something up about it.
because
But
that's really
it's
fascinating.
it's something which has been done. There are quite a few studies. I'm sure you could find them if you just sort of Google scholared um biology of political leaning, or biology and politics, or neurology and politics, things like that. Um, there have been all manner of things, usually dealing with MRI imaging of the brain and exposing people to certain political images or certain audible stimuli and things like that, um, to then sort of get these images. And it's very interesting how different sort of left wing brains are and right wing brains are. They are structurally quite different from each other. And well, this is where you then sort of get a bit awkward for the lefties who are like, oh, everything's social conditioned and nothing can be biological. And they get a little bit blown the fuck out by the fact that, well, no, your brain structure is largely genetic. Yeah, we know, neuroplasticity. Unfortunately, that doesn't allow you to completely rewrite the entirety of your brain. Your brain kind of grows in one way, and then it sort of grows out from that point as you live your life and things change. But that start point is pretty much determined from the genes that you're built from. So yeah, most people's sort of political orientation is, it's not predetermined, obviously, because there is a lot of social construction around politics. For example, you can look at someone's brain structure, you can determine, well, they're probably going to be, say, right wing, but does that mean they're going to be nationalist right wing? Are they just going to be conservative right wing? Are they going to be libertarian right wing? Yeah, this is a little bit more up in the air than anything else. So yeah, I just found that particularly interesting. But the fact that disgust is one of those very, very acute ones, as I said, 95% accuracy in a one-shot test, that's pretty damn good.
Allison, are you muted? Where is everyone? What's going on?
She's possibly gone on to Google
Oh,
Scholar and it's like,
sorry.
I
No,
must
no, no,
find the
no. Yeah,
things.
yeah. I just slipped into the. No, I was there, but then my microphone muted itself randomly. So I apologize. I was talking and looking at an article called "Your Brain on Politics," and it's looking at the difference between liberal and conservative brains related to uh, emotional regulation.
Yeah,
So
that one's very, very interesting. You've got to be very careful how you read some of the results of those studies, because, well, I've kind of touched on this in some of my videos, because there's a lot of liberal bias in the softer sciences, things like psychology and sociology. When they see those studies, they see that people on the right wing have a larger basically center for emotion in their brain, and they're like, oh well, that just proves that they act on emotion. Oh, color me surprised that they get upset about things all the time. And actually, if they bothered to understand what they're looking at, they'd realize that people on the right wing, people who tend to fall into the conservative thing, tend to have better emotional control as a result of that. While they may feel more emotions, they're also better at managing them, which is why I always point out to those people, it's like, do you wonder why the conservative stereotype is, button down collar, bolt upright, oh no, I'm going to take this all with a stiff upper lip, and no, don't show anything. That's why. It's because that center of your brain gives you superior emotional control. So that tends to be why, people on the lefty side, the liberal side, the progressive side especially, when they get upset by something, they fucking riot. They shout, they scream, they have a temper tantrum like a fucking 2-year-old. Whereas when people on the right get upset by something, they tend to go, well, shit. That's about it.
Another thing is that does the study account for, like, does it do it by age? Because the age of people's political views tend to change as they get older. And that was something else.
Yeah. One thing which I would be aware of with that is that because their viewpoint is changing, or is it because the society is changing?
I think it's a bit of both of those things. I think that what usually happens is society ever more moves towards liberalism slowly. Young liberals are often really impatient, and they want to get to where they think utopia is a lot faster. But as they get older, they come to the realization that maybe some of the things they were really proponents of are, anywhere between less than reasonable to just completely ridiculous, like identifying as ketchup or something. And that they also see that the world is moving ever steadily towards, this more sort of it becomes more and more liberal as time moves on. It just does so very slowly. So
Okay, so I found another one.
The common phrase for that, I think, is, if you were to live forever, you would always end up as a conservative, because eventually the world would always change to basically how you wanted it to be anyway at some point.
Okay, so I just found another study. It's from the Smithsonian. So in this particular study was based on Democrats versus Republicans and how their brains processed risk. And apparently the research showed that Democrats exhibited significantly greater activity in the left insula, a region associated with social and self-awareness during the task. Republicans, however, showed significantly greater activity in the right amygdala, a region involved in our fight or flight response. Interesting. So essentially the liberals were concerned about how, I guess, if it was their social region or their self-awareness region, they were concerned about how whatever they were doing was making them look in the eyes of others.
Yeah. It was how it was going to reflect on them, but also on how they could use it on other people. It's anything to do with social interaction, basically.
No, I'm sorry. That was an expression of disgust. Bad. I was just like, I just can't imagine being so constrained by the opinions of others.
You just got cut off there.
Constrained by the opinion of Google. To the point where it affects the way you think. Well, I guess it affects everybody's way.
Well, that's just it. It's not to them, though, being constrained by that. It's just that's their pattern of thinking. There's very limited amounts that they can do on it, because it's how their brain is structured. So while it's not sort of deterministic of how it is, it's just kind of their go-to way of processing things. Now, obviously, that's sort of your immediate reaction. You can, of course, override that later on. You can ingest that information and then decide how you're going to act on it later. But that's just sort of an interesting look at the immediate sort of knee-jerk, this is your first port of call on how to process it.
Well, whereas Republicans showed significantly greater activity in the right amygdala, a region involved in our fight or flight, which makes sense because you're engaging in a risky activity.
Yes, it's risk assessment.
It's risk assessment. So the Republicans were engaged in risk assessment, whereas the Democrats were engaged in social assessment. So how my activity that I'm engaging in will cause my social body to become diseased or not diseased based on other people's opinions of me. That's That seems very conservative. That's what sort of makes me boggle a little about these political divisions that we create. This idea that you're constantly concerned with. Brian, you're talking. Yeah.
That sounded very chastising.
Yeah.
Brian, you're talking.
Okay. Well.
Oh, I see how it is, Brian.
Yeah. We're not interesting enough for you, are we, Brian? Okay, go on, have your conversation. All right. So, but it just is interesting to me because if you think about it, constantly trying to conform your behavior and your values and your morals to social consensus, isn't that sort of what we usually think of as conservative?
Is it?
Well, I mean, because think about it. That's how we maintain all these traditions from generation to generation to generation to generation, is we teach our children to conform to our beliefs about the world. And this is the Democrats essentially look to social consensus to determine how they should feel about something, whereas the Republicans are apparently integrating actual data about the situation in question. See what I'm saying? Like they're responding to the situation rather than the social perception of the situation, whereas the Democrats are responding to the social perception of the situation.
Yes, but
which is
doing that when even though it's a risk assessment, you can still risk assess very, very badly, and then sort of make decisions like, I don't understand this situation, I'm going to shoot it.
Yeah.
That's bad.
No, I totally agree that you can have very bad risk assessment, but I'm saying that the principle is so interesting. It's so interesting that Democrats are constantly saying to themselves, what is the social consensus and how do I conform to it?
Well, it's not necessarily the social consensus. It's how it's thinking about it in a way that would be more social. It's how am I going to use it with other people, and how can other people use it on me? That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go along with the social consensus of what it is, because in-group, out-group dynamics. If your social consensus is with your in-group, but your in-group is, say, a social minority who is opposed to the social consensus, so if you're the social minority that says religion is stupid because religion is stupid, that doesn't matter. You're still going to conform to that, even though it's not the actual cultural consensus at the time. Yeah, but you take on that information. So if someone would have given you a lecture about God, you'd be thinking, oh, well, how is this going to affect me with other people? Well, socially, I don't like it because you're a person trying to tell me what to do. I want to be with my people who think like me.
Okay, but here's the thing. Republicans aren't doing that. So there still is this distinct difference. Even if we're talking about, the Republican in-group versus out-group, and the Democrat in-group versus out-group, and the Democrats want to conform to their own in-group, the Republicans aren't conceptualizing the situation in terms of social consensus. They're conceptualizing the situation in terms of what's in front of them, which is, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, I'm not a Republican or a conservative,
because that can then come from other experiences and things like that as well. So, according to them, how can I put this? If you had a social rule that said, don't do this thing over here, and you're confronted with that, your risk assessment will say, well, tradition says I shouldn't do it, so I'm not going to do it. That's your risk assessment. That's as far as it goes.
Yeah. But that's the risk assessment.
But then that's a risk assessment going on tradition, but it's still irrational then.
Yeah, no, I know.
Irrational in that.
But what I'm saying is that when the Republicans, well, maybe it's just the task, maybe it's just the risky task that they're engaging in, or the type of task that they're engaging in. I'm saying that the Democrats are doing that thing. They're saying, how does this, my behavior right now, conform or not conform with the social consensus? But the Republicans are not doing that. They're just engaging with the behavior itself, which suggests that.
And I also point out it's not an either or. It's different amounts of the thing. It's not like one is on. It's not a binary. It's not one is on, one is off. It's a varying ratio of activity. Surely in this, because everyone's going to be doing a little bit of both.
It's on a spectrum.
Definitely.
Okay.
I just find it interesting that this particular study finds that Democrats are more about, and I would say that it's consistent with what I've observed about Democrats too, that they are more about the social consensus, more about how their actions conform with what they consider to be the in-group social consensus. But in a lot of ways, that sort of, I mean, if you think about it, that need to conform to a social consensus also gives them a lot of power when it comes to the traditions that get perpetuated.
Well, yes. Okay. I'm gonna jump in because I can. Yes, because it allows them to have a strong sense of in-group, but it also allows them to have a strong sense of out-group. This is why, and I've looked at this study actually on my channel. I can't remember in which video it was, but they found, and it was looking at, I believe it was presidents and military generals or something like that, and how right-wing people and left-wing people would treat something to do with hierarchy. And they basically found that, was it that study? There were lots of examples in this one study, and I think it was the neoliberal echo, no, not the something academic echo chambers one. I can't remember the title, it doesn't matter. But there was a load of studies done on this, and they basically found that, I'm trying to collect my thoughts really quickly, people who were on the right wing were more likely to come up with a fair result on something because they were better at judging things impartially, whereas liberal people would more likely show in-group, out-group bias. So in a study which was done, and I think this was the one example they came up with, which was to do with a president and military general, the Republicans were just as likely to say that a Republican president, Republican general, when they fucked up, they were more likely to say they fucked up, like call them on their bullshit, basically, whereas the lefty liberal side was more likely to say, oh, no, it's fine. They were more likely to excuse it in their own side, but be harsher on the other side in the same condition. So people on the right were more likely to be able to play fair, basically, across in-groups or out-groups. So that might go some way towards explaining that people on this left progressive side are more likely to have a more fierce in-group, out-group conflict than people on the right, who are more likely to sort of look at actually what's happening and play fair by what they're seeing.
Yeah, well, I mean, that sort of speaks to what they were seeing in this study, that the Democrats, I mean, because social and self-awareness is really about in-group, out-group, and avoiding becoming an out-group. Because you want to maintain behavior that's consistent with the in-group's norms. That's really... Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I think that's entirely in line with what you're talking about, too. The Democrats were concerned about maintaining an in-group, maintaining themselves within the in-group. So when they were engaging in this behavior... Maybe it was the risky behavior itself that sort of instigated the thinking, oh, hey, I got to make sure that I conform with my in-group's ideas of what I should be doing. Whereas with the Republicans, it was just, I guess, a more straightforward, like you were saying, it's just an analysis of what's going on. But doesn't that, like, for me, doesn't that just sort of suggest that Democrats actually are, again, more enculturated in this sort of disgust-based thinking, but also more tribalistic, you know, which is just seems so odd that we would call that
necessarily, because any side of this can be tribalistic. What we're looking at is propensity and degree.
Yeah, I know.
So
they have a greater propensity towards tribalism.
Well, yeah, I would say. I mean, if you consider... I mean, just sort of look at how they actually behave. They are very, very aggressive towards out-groups, whereas people on sort of the right, or on sort of even on our grouping of things here, we seem to give less of a fuck. I don't fucking know. I don't know. I'm just chatting shit at this point. I don't know.
We're just some sort of bizarre, maybe hanging hemorrhoid of the ass of humanity.
Okay.
Or is that too grotesque?
Dingleberry, more like it, but
dingleberry. We're a dingleberry. We're a bat in the nasal cavity of humanity. I don't know where I'm going with this either, TL dear. Okay, so Are we officially in the weeds? Shall we? I think we've done an hour. I think there's plenty more we could discuss, but
Yeah, I think what the way that this would need to go is to actually basically start looking at brain structure and what actually goes on in the brain in different political organizations and different political leanings, and then sort of really get your head around like what's there, because that'll then give you a sort of objective starting point for all of this. There's loads of data about it as well, so I think that might be a helpful thing to look at.
All right.
yes, indeed. I think there's tons.
Actually, I'm just thinking there's because I'm just going through all my notes and seeing if I've used all of them. Here is something very interesting. You know how on Honey Badger Radio we've talked about how things like religion are generally propagated more by women than by men?
Yes.
Yes. Disgust is gendered. Women are more likely to experience disgust than men, and more acutely. And that's something which has, again, actually been demonstrated in studies as well.
Huh.
So something to consider there.
Well, that's gonna go well with the next part of my series, because I'm gonna examine why it is that we like these systems of Puritanism, or we seem to be so attracted, and why they are gendered. So there you go.
Well, I would put it down to, well, evolutionarily speaking, it makes sense. You know, women have to generally do the whole child rearing thing, as we know. When pregnancy happens and when child rearing happens, germ phobia goes up, problems with eating food goes up, cravings for foods which are low pathogen increase as well. So it makes sense that women are more likely to have those, because women who exhibited that more were more likely to successfully breed. It would make sense that men would have a lower general sense of disgust, because, again, if they're the ones having to go out and do all the horrible, disgusting, gross things, if you're a relentless germphobe, instead of shoving your hand in a mammoth's arse in order to get some meat for your wench, you can't really be disgusted by that, because, well, what's got to be done's got to be done, and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, again, I think, sort of how a society would raise that it wouldn't then surprise me that women would sort of be more likely to go into that disgust-based thinking and saying, nope, that's disgusting over there, we're not allowed to have it. And then the men just sort of complying, because if they don't, they don't get that poon.
Well, they could also have a function in child rearing as well.
Of course.
Yeah, so the modeling the disgust so that people know, or children.
Yeah, and that ties back quite nicely to how disgust is learned and the inheritance from people's faces in young children. It's all a very elaborate thing that's all tied together throughout all of evolution. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm actually gonna approach it more from a social systems and cultural systems angle, because I think that's where we have the potential of maybe making a positive impact in perhaps, like maybe questioning the systems of disgust that we've inherited, especially related to gender, and maybe moving beyond it as much as possible, and we're never going to move beyond necessarily the biological roots, but we might be able to mediate them and not blow ourselves up in some sort of puritanical Twitter-induced rage. Because one of the things that I proposed is that, our current system of social media allows there to be these gigantic enclaves of Puritans who have like these progressive waves of purging and purifying themselves till they're so incredibly narrow in their thinking, and then at the same time, as the internet creates a situation where that there's a heathen at the gate, at every single gate, at any click could take you to the nest of heathenism. Could you imagine being in that mindset of needing this Puritanism to make sense of your world, and knowing at any moment you could click something and it'd take you to a thread that'll unravel your sense of reality? It must be pretty horrible to be in that headspace.
It's just the headspace of someone who is triggered by life.
Yeah, but
I can't imagine having my sensibilities that highly strung, but some people do.
Yeah, Though there's a lot of people who do, and they're currently thinking that they're being ruled by the Antichrist in the U.S. and then that half their own country is evil. Ah, okay. All right. I think the Trump reference is where we should probably hang a left and get off the highway.
I do actually, just really quickly, I noticed that someone did just type the whole deplorable thing in the chat. Isn't it interesting, just while we were talking about gendered disgust, that it was the female candidate who went down the "you're all deplorable, you're disgusting, no one should go near with you," and the guy didn't.
Yeah.
No, and the thing is that
proves nothing. It's a sample size of 2, but just it's something that was interesting given what we talked about earlier.
I think it does. Anecdotes are not evidence, but they can be persuasive. When you have evidence, they can be persuasive in illustrating that evidence. So, I mean, I think that's a persuasive anecdote, illustrating
and why more women, all those women were supporting Hillary and got really emotional when they lost.
Yeah, and got really pissed at other women who didn't think in lockstep with them because
you're the outgroup now, so you're evil.
Oh God, the thing is that can't we get past that?
Nope. Like in-group outgroup is basically hardwired into your brain. You can't get rid of it.
Well, at least can we maybe be aware of it more consciously so that we don't end up destroying ourselves with social media? Like, I mean,
but this is the thing. If you did that, then you'd have to end up treating your outgroup as if they were human, and people don't do that. Especially if you're one of those people who, deems the outgroup to be disgusting, because sense of disgust has been very directly linked to dehumanization. So. Yeah,
that's the thing. I mean, we're playing with some serious bomb-grade Puritanism here, especially when you see the liberals and the Democrats. I mean, they've latched on to the kind of outgroup rhetoric that precedes a genocide, like this war on women rhetoric. That's stuff that precedes genocide, and they're directing it at the other half of their own country. It's disturbing.
I do have one I finally found one note that I haven't referenced here. I'm gonna put it out and then just sort of see what you think about it. Again, it's another study from done using fMRIs on people's brains and exposing them to images of people, and they are people from stigmatized groups, so drug users, homeless people, and whatnot like that. And in all people that they were shown it, they had a reaction of disgust, and it was the distinct chemical reaction again in the brain that's very, very obvious. You can see it on an MRI. So people will dismiss it and simply not care about it as much. So that's something quite interesting that I found, that there are certain people, probably because most of the people in the MRIs don't identify with those people not being drug users or homeless, but how they just sort of instantly would say, nope, that's triggered my disgust response.
And that was with all political leanings across the board?
Not in that study as far as I can see. I don't think political leanings were even a thing. They were just generally testing for disgust responses in stigmatized groups, and apparently it's something that's pretty universal. People feel it regardless. So I'd be very interested to stick some of these hardcore, I'm so empathetic SJWs into an MRI and show them pics of homeless people and see their disgust center light up. That would be very interesting to me.
Show them male members. Actually, what would be really interesting is if you showed them male members of the groups that they supposedly champion, like black men, men who have disabilities, non-white men. I'm sure that disgust center would light up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting, actually. Now all I have to do is see if I can rent some time in a lab with an MRI machine and convince a load of social justice warriors and feminists to go to the lab with me.
Well, you could always
good luck.
Entice them with cookies.
Possibly.
Everybody loves cookies, I think.
I miss cookies.
Well, none of them are diabetic, hopefully.
Yeah, well, maybe there are some people who don't like cookies. I don't want to. And you know what? If you don't like cookies, you're disgusting.
Deplorable.
You are deplorable. How can you live with yourself not liking cookies?
I like macaroons.
Macaroons are delicious. Yes, I think that macaroons would qualify as cookies. What are you saying, that there are types of cookies you don't like, Brian?
There are some cookies that don't fall very neatly into the cookie binary of whether it's a cookie or a cracker or pastry. I guess it's more like a trinary.
So what are you proposing? Some sort of interpastriality?
Yeah, I'm proposing that there's intersections of various kinds of cookie privilege, and I'm just asking that we look at them objectively and, try to see them all as equals. And I think macaroons deserve a spot on that.
Double chocolate cookies are the most oppressed cookie. That's why they're sold in the largest amounts.
Holy shit! Are double chocolate cookies? I don't often eat cookies because I have an egg allergy.
Chocolate cookies.
But I actually found out that Chips Ahoy cookies don't have eggs in them. However, they aggravate my gluten intolerance. So even though I like all humans, all people who can be accepted as human, I love cookies. Unfortunately, I can't eat them very often.
Chocolate chip cookies represent the regular beauty standard of cookie. That's why whenever you guys think of cookies, your first image is probably a chocolate chip cookie, which means you're a bigot.
Wow.
You're not including Nutter Butters or those pinwheel things or those sugar ones that have the little dab of like red shit in the middle, or Oreos.
I see. Okay,
but Brian, how does this disadvantage women, Brian?
Oh,
because if you can make that link, we can write an academic paper about this, get it peer reviewed.
Obviously,
well, cookies
it disadvantages me. It disadvantages me because I can't eat a lot of these things that you're talking about, and that's obviously patriarchal intestinal privilege. But the thing is that the personalist, not only is the personalist political, but any woman that's disadvantaged means everything.
It disadvantages women who can eat them as well because it inevitably makes them obese, and that's because they're inexpensive, sugary, and which is made to appeal to female taste buds. And it's also usually sold in low-income areas, 2 for $1, which are often occupied by single mothers who don't have a lot of time to go out and buy groceries and cook food, so they just buy a package of cookies, and it makes them overweight and sick and diabetic, and that's why it's oppressive to women.
But also
and blacks, because lower income areas, they're disproportionately represented.
Yes.
We've done it. We've gone intersectional with our cookies.
That's right.
Yep. It's the patriarchy.
Also, cookie is a term that often references a woman's vagina. As in the 70s, you say, if you want this cookie might kill you, which is basically promoting rape culture when men go out and buy cookies and eat them because they're basically just turning vaginas into objects which they can then consume at their leisure, often in multiple colors, shapes, and sizes, and for extremely inexpensive prices, which gives men a sense of entitlement over women's vaginas.
Cookies are basically prostitutes.
Yes.
Cookies represent prostitution in the phallocentric patriarchy.
Yes.
Oh my God! All right, I think this is
time to end the stream.
I think that's it. But I've given you something to think about. Now educate yourself, especially you Oreos out there. All right, that's the end.